My name is Reza Hosseini, and I am from Iran. I serve as a naval technician in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, assigned to patrol operations near the Strait of Hormuz. People often think life in the military is all action and heroics, but most of the time, it's a quiet, repetitive routine checks, drills, reports, and the constant hum of the engines beneath the deck. For years, I had grown used to this rhythm. The sea became a friend, the vessel my second home, and the tension in the region a constant background noise. Like the low rumble of distant thunder you learn to ignore. Growing up in Bandar Abbas, I never imagined I would find myself here, staring at the horizon where the Persian Gulf meets the strait. My father was a fisherman, and he often warned me about the sea's unpredictable nature, how one moment of calm could turn into disaster in seconds. I didn't understand him fully back then. Life seemed simple, and my dreams were bigger than the stories of storms and capsized boats. But now, years later, those lessons replayed in my mind every day. The morning air was crisp and carried the familiar scent of salt and diesel. I was on deck, running a routine check on the radar and communication systems, making sure everything was in order. The sun's light danced over the water, making it appear calm and almost serene. But the sea, I knew, could be deceiving. I glanced at the other crew members, some already on their morning duties, others sipping tea and joking quietly, trying to ignore the tension that never truly left our minds. We had learned to live with it, like a shadow that followed us from port to port. I often found myself reflecting during these quiet hours, thinking about my life, my choices, and my faith or lack of it. I grew up in a household that respected religion, but I drifted away over the years. Life, duty, and ambition took over. I believed in my skills, my training, and my intellect. Faith was something abstract, something I paid lip service to when convenient, not a guide in my daily life. I thought I was strong, prepared for any challenge. I was wrong. Our captain, a stern but fair man, walked past me, nodding at the crew as he inspected the deck. He had a calm presence, the kind that made even tense situations seem manageable. I admired him, not just for his authority, but for the way he carried himself. Years of experience had taught him to anticipate danger before it arrived, a skill I secretly envied. I watched him pause near the radar, his eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing unusual today, he muttered to himself, more like a reassurance than a report. I nodded silently, returning to my instruments, feeling a strange mixture of boredom and vigilance. That was our life, always on alert, but often uneventful. The Strait of Hormuz, for all its beauty, had always been a strategic and dangerous location. It was one of the most important checkpoints in the world for oil transit, and every country with stakes in the region kept a close eye on it. For us, it meant constant vigilance. There were always rumors of hostile activity, stories of drones spotted in the distance, or reports of nearby skirmishes. Most of the time, these rumors never materialized into action. We had grown used to that rhythm, dismissing warnings as the noise of a tense region. But in the back of my mind, I knew that peace in the strait was always temporary, a fragile bubble that could burst without warning. I walked along the deck, my boots echoing against the metal floor, listening to the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull. Each wave was a reminder of nature's power, a silent warning that even the smallest shift could change everything. I had always respected the sea, but lately, I had begun to fear it, not the water itself, but the unpredictability of life on it. The routines, the drills, the calm, it all felt like a mask. Underneath it, I knew danger was always waiting, sometimes far away, sometimes closer than we realized. As I checked the navigation instruments, I noticed subtle changes in the radar blips, a few ships moving differently, a pattern that felt off. I pointed it out to the junior technician beside me, who shrugged and returned to his tasks. He didn't see it, or maybe he chose not to. Experience had taught me to trust these instincts, even if they were vague. My heart beat a little faster, a premonition I tried to ignore. But the calm of the morning persisted, almost defiantly, and I forced myself to breathe, telling myself it was nothing. Lunch passed without incident. We shared a modest meal, mostly bread, rice, and tea, talking quietly about family, life at home, and the next assignments. Laughter occasionally filled the mess hall. Small pockets of normalcy amidst the constant awareness that at any moment, our lives could change. I smiled when I could, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the horizon, to the radar, to the subtle tension in the air. It was a strange mix of normalcy and unease. A day like any other, yet charged with an energy I could not name. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a deeper shade of blue, the kind that felt heavy and intense. The sun glinted off the waves, casting long reflections across the water. I stood on the deck again, hands gripping the railing, trying to shake the unease that had been creeping into me all day. The crew continued their routines, unaware or ignoring what I felt a small, gnawing sense that something significant was about to happen. I told myself it was nerves, paranoia from years of tension. Yet, deep down, I knew that the calm we experienced was always temporary, like a pause before a storm. I returned to my post near the engine room, running checks and logging data, each beep and hum of the equipment grounding me. I reminded myself of my training, of the countless drills and emergency scenarios we had practiced. I believed in my skills, in our preparedness, but as the day progressed, I could not shake the feeling that this calm, this routine, was the last before everything changed. And in the quiet of that afternoon, as the Strait of Hormuz stretched endlessly before me, I felt the first shadow of something coming in invisible tension, a whisper of chaos waiting to break through the horizon. The calm of the morning had long faded, but we still tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. I returned to my station on the deck, keeping my eyes on the horizon and my hands steady on the instruments. But the subtle unease that had been growing throughout the day now refused to leave. There was a tension in the air, one that seemed almost physical, pressing against the chest. The sea still sparkled under the afternoon sun, deceptively peaceful. Yet my instinct screamed that something was about to happen. We received the first message over our secure channels just after mid-afternoon. At first, it seemed like routine intelligence chatter, a few words about movements in the region. But then the words changed everything. Reports of airstrikes targeting IRGC positions across southern Iran. My stomach tightened. My heart began to race, not with the familiar rhythm of training or drills, but with genuine fear. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a distant rumor. This was real, and it was happening now. The message continued, more details trickling in. One of our senior aides, a high-ranking officer stationed along the strait, had been killed. The news hit me like a punch. I had known him personally, his meticulous attention to detail, his calm demeanor during exercises, his jokes that could lighten even the tensest moments on patrol. And now he was gone. The thought of mortality, usually abstract in our line of work, suddenly became concrete and immediate. Death wasn't a distant possibility anymore. It was very near, and it could reach me at any second. The crew reacted quickly, some with fear, others with disbelief. Radios crackled constantly, officers shouting instructions, some giving orders I barely understood in the rush. My captain's voice rang clear, precise, authoritative, all units. Heightened alert. Keep your positions. Report any unidentified aircraft. Stay calm and follow procedures. Calm, I realized, was easier said than done. We were trained for emergencies, but no training could prepare us for the panic of knowing that someone in our own ranks had already been killed. I felt a strange mix of adrenaline and disbelief. My hands moved automatically, running through emergency protocols, checking radar, monitoring communications, preparing the engines for sudden maneuvers. Was elsewhere. Images of my fallen colleague flashed in my mind, moments we had shared during long nights on patrol. I couldn't shake them, and yet I had to focus, because survival demanded focus, and hesitation could be fatal. Then, a faint noise reached us, barely noticeable at first, a distant rumble in the sky, like thunder. I froze, my eyes scanning the horizon. The others noticed it too. At first, we tried to rationalize it, perhaps a passing jet, perhaps a cargo plane, but the sound grew louder, more insistent, more menacing. My heart thudded violently. Something was approaching, and I knew it wasn't routine. Minutes passed, and the tension became unbearable. Every shadow on the horizon, every flicker of movement in the air, drew our attention. Orders were repeated, some shouted, some mumbled, some ignored in panic. The bridge was a whirlwind of activity. Officers pointing at screens, issuing directives, while the rest of us followed the protocol as best we could. But protocol only goes so far when fear seeps into your bones. Fear isn't something you train for, it's something you feel. And it makes every decision a battle between logic and instinct. Then, we saw them. Military aircraft, low on the horizon, moving swiftly, deliberately. Their presence was unmistakable. The calm that had governed our day shattered instantly. Panic, which had only been a faint shadow, now gripped the crew. Faces paled. Voices rose. Hands shook. I tried to steady myself, repeating the instructions in my mind. Stay calm. Monitor. Report. Follow orders. But inside, my chest felt tight, my stomach twisted in knots. The reality of the situation hit me harder than anything I had trained for. We were in the midst of a targeted strike zone. The first explosion wasn't close enough to destroy us, but close enough to shake the vessel violently. The metal beneath my feet vibrated, the ship shuddered, and alarms blared. Crew members screamed, others shouted instructions, and the radio was filled with frantic chatter. The chaos was overwhelming. I could hear my own heartbeat over the noise, pounding in my ears. For a brief moment, I considered running, hiding anything to escape the terror. But I knew instinctively that hesitation would be deadly. I had responsibilities, both to the ship and to my crewmates, and I couldn't abandon them, not even in fear. We moved quickly, trying to maintain some semblance of order. Damage control teams were dispatched to check for fires or breaches. My role was to ensure the engines and navigation systems remained operational, and I focused on that with trembling hands. Every beep, every flicker on the radar, was scrutinized with an intensity one had never experienced before. I couldn't allow panic to cloud judgment, yet it lingered at the edges of my mind, gnawing at me with every passing second. As the explosions continued sporadically in the distance, a sinking realization settled over me. This was no accident. This was a calculated attack. The Aide's death wasn't a warning, it was a signal. And we were now caught in the middle. Fear transformed into a physical presence, heavy, pressing, almost paralyzing. I felt my legs weaken, my breath quicken. But amidst the fear, a strange clarity began to form. I had to survive. Not just for myself, but for the crew. Panic could not guide me, action had to. By the time evening approached, the tension had reached a peak. The sky darkened with the late sunlight, casting long shadows over the deck. We maintained a heightened state of readiness, our eyes scanning constantly for the next threat. The crew was exhausted but alert, operating under the dual pressure of imminent danger and the emotional weight of our fallen comrade. I looked at the horizon, my mind racing with what IFS and grim possibilities, trying to reconcile the calm I had known earlier with the chaos now surrounding us. It was a surreal experience, normal life and mortal danger intertwined in a way I could never have anticipated. In that moment, I realized that the Strait of Hormuz was no longer just a passage of strategic importance. It had become a crucible, testing our courage, our training, and our resolve. And I knew, deep in my heart, that the coming hours would not be like any other patrol. Something had changed irrevocably, and survival would demand everything I had: skill, composure, and, as I would soon discover, faith. The time the sun began its slow descent behind the horizon, the Strait of Hormuz had become a tense, almost surreal battlefield. The calm I had experienced in the morning felt like a distant memory. Each wave that lapped against the hull of our vessel carried the echo of explosions, the shadow of danger, and the unmistakable presence of death. Fear had seeped into every corner of the ship, every movement, every breath we took. It was real, immediate, and suffocating. The first explosion I had heard earlier in the afternoon had shaken us, but the second and third were closer, louder, more violent. I remember the sound of the metal hull shuddering beneath my feet, the alarms blaring, and the screams of crew members who had frozen or stumbled in panic. The bridge was a whirlwind of activity. Officers shouted orders that collided with the cacophony of radio chatter, engine warnings, and the ongoing chaos outside. I tried to focus, but my thoughts kept racing. My stomach churned, my palms were sweaty, and every instinct screamed at me to flee. But fleeing wasn't an option. Our survival depended on staying alert, staying coordinated, and staying alive. That I could see the fear etched on everyone's faces. Hassan, the junior technician I had come to trust, was trembling visibly, his hands fumbling over the instruments. He looked at me, eyes wide with panic, and I could see the same fear reflected in him that I
wanted
felt
to say
in my
something
own
to calm
chest.
him,
But my voice caught in my throat. How could I comfort someone else when I was barely holding myself together? I swallowed hard, forcing my hands to steady as I reminded myself of our training. We can survive this. We have to survive this. The thought was almost prayer-like, even if I wasn't ready to call it that yet. The explosions continued, each one closer than the last. I had never experienced anything like this, not even during combat, drills or emergency simulations. The ship trembled violently, and the vibrations traveled through my body, making it hard to stand, hard to think, hard to breathe. Metal screeched and groaned under the stress, and every creak felt like a warning. I grabbed onto the nearest railing, trying to anchor myself against the overwhelming sense of helplessness. Around me, crew members shouted, stumbled, and in some cases collapsed under the weight of panic. The reality of mortality was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, pressing, unavoidable. As we scrambled to assess damage and secure the vessel, my mind kept returning to the news of the aide who had been killed earlier. He had been like a mentor to me, in many ways calm under pressure, decisive in moments of crisis. And now he was gone, a casualty of a war that had suddenly become very real for all of us. The thought of death hovering so close made me feel raw, exposed, and small. It was humbling, terrifying, and strangely clarifying all at once. I realized then that fear was not my enemy. It was a signal, a reminder that life was fragile, fleeting, and precious. I remember the moment when another explosion rocked the ship from a closer distance. The vibration was so intense that I lost my balance and fell against the bulkhead. Pain shot through my shoulder, but I barely noticed it. What I noticed was the sound of chaos around me: shouts, alarms, metal bending, and the distant roar of the aircraft above. In that instant, everything slowed down in my mind. Time seemed to stretch as I realized how thin the line was between life and death. Every decision I had made up to that point had led me here. But survival now demanded more than skill. It demanded presence, composure, and perhaps something beyond myself. I closed my eyes for a brief second, trying to center myself. In the darkness behind my eyelids, memories of my childhood, my family, my faith or lack thereof flickered like a film. I remembered my father warning me about the sea, my mother's quiet prayers before bedtime, the teachings I had ignored, the beliefs I had abandoned. And then, in the quiet of my mind amidst the chaos outside, a single thought emerged: I might not survive this. The weight of it was unbearable, yet strangely liberating. For the first time in years, I felt raw, honest, and completely human. Hassan grabbed my arm, nearly shaking me. "Reza, what do we do?" He shouted over the alarms. I didn't have an answer. Words failed me. My training screamed at me to take action, to check systems, to report, to execute maneuvers. But the thought that refused to leave me was this: I am not ready to die. It was a simple thought, yet it carried the force of a prayer I hadn't spoken. I realized then that survival was not just about physical skill. It was about mental clarity, courage, and a will to keep going even when everything else screamed to stop. We managed to maintain minimal control of the ship, stabilizing critical systems and keeping the engines running. But every second was a struggle. Every wave, every sound, every flicker of the radar could signal the next catastrophe. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, my lungs burning from rapid breaths, my hands trembling as I adjusted dials and monitored readings. Fear had become a physical presence, something that weighed on my body and my mind simultaneously. And yet, within that fear, a sliver of clarity emerged. I needed to act. I needed to survive. I needed to stay alive for myself, for the crew, for reasons I could not yet name. As darkness fell over the strait, the horizon lit up with distant flashes of fire and explosions. The sky, once a peaceful blue, was now a canvas of smoke, fire, and uncertainty. I could see the silhouettes of other vessels in the distance, some moving cautiously, others hurrying away from perceived danger. The sense of isolation was overwhelming. We were in the middle of a conflict zone, surrounded by enemies we could barely see, with death waiting invisibly just beyond the horizon. Every instinct in me screamed to run, hide, pray, do anything, but there was nowhere to run. This was our reality, our crucible, and we had no choice but to endure it. It was in this moment, amid explosions, chaos, and fear, that the first seed of something different began to grow within me. Not yet faith, not yet hope, but a recognition of my own vulnerability, my own mortality, and the realization that perhaps there was more to life than skill, training, and survival instinct. Perhaps there was something beyond myself, something unseen that could guide, protect, or intervene. I didn't understand it yet, but it was the first spark that would soon grow into something that would change my life forever. The darkness had fully settled over the Strait of Hormuz, and with it came a sense of isolation that I had never felt before. The explosions that had rocked the morning and afternoon were now replaced by a tense, lingering hum, the anticipation of another strike, closer and more precise than any before. My body was exhausted, my nerves frayed, and my mind teetered on the edge of panic. Every fiber of my being screamed that I might not survive the night. And for the first time, I truly understood the weight of mortality. The radar picked up movements, unmistakably hostile aircraft approaching. The sound of engines grew louder, sharper, more menacing, slicing through the night air. I could feel the vibrations through the deck, through the metal beneath my feet, and even through the soles of my boots. My hands shook uncontrollably as I reached for the control panel. I tried to steady them, repeating in my mind the countless drills I had memorized over years of training. But this was no simulation. This was real, and the consequences were death or survival. A sudden, violent explosion tore through the air to our port side. The blast wave rocked the ship with such force that I was thrown against the railing. Pain shot through my ribs, but I barely noticed it. My mind was consumed with a single, urgent thought: I am going to die here. The fear was immediate, all-consuming, almost tangible, pressing down on me like the weight of the ocean itself. In that moment, nothing else mattered: training, rank, responsibility, they all vanished in the face of imminent death. Around me, chaos reigned. Crew members were screaming, running, trying desperately to secure systems, put out fires, or stabilize the vessel. Some had collapsed, overcome by panic. The alarm screamed louder than my own thoughts, a terrifying symphony of danger that seemed designed to overwhelm every sense. I could barely distinguish between what was real and what was imagined, the world blurring into a series of loud noises, flashing lights, and violent shudders. My heart raced uncontrollably. My lungs burned from rapid breathing, and my stomach twisted in fear and nausea. The very air around me felt charged, as if the atmosphere itself conspired against our survival. For a brief moment, I thought of my life, my family, my parents, the streets of Bandar Abbas where I grew up, the childhood memories that seemed so distant yet now unbearably vivid. I thought of the colleagues I had laughed with, trained with, and shared meals with. I thought of the aide who had been killed earlier that day, and I understood, with a painful clarity, that my fate could be the same. The thought of leaving life unfinished, of never seeing home again, of never speaking to those I loved, weighed on me more heavily than any explosion ever could. And then, an odd, almost surreal clarity washed over me. In the midst of chaos, in the heart of terror, I realized that fear alone would not save me. I needed more than skill, more than reflex, more than training. Something beyond myself, beyond what I had relied on all these years, was needed. And in that desperate moment, an old memory surfaced, a memory of a man I had met years ago, who spoke of faith, of Jesus, of hope in the darkest moments. I had dismissed him back then, laughed at the idea, ignored the words. But now, as death seemed to hover over me like a dark cloud, I remembered his words in vivid detail: when you are at your lowest, call on him. I whispered it quietly, almost unconsciously: Jesus, if you can hear me, please save me. The words felt strange leaving my lips. They were foreign, yet they carried a weight I could not explain. I did not expect a miracle. I did not expect the explosions to stop or the aircraft to vanish. But in the act of speaking, of acknowledging my vulnerability and turning outward for help, I felt something shift within me. It was subtle at first, a small easing of the tension, a momentary lightness in my chest, but it was real. And in that instant, I clung to it, like a lifeline in a stormy sea. Another explosion shook the vessel, closer this time. I felt the deck tremble beneath me, metal groaning under the strain. The force threw me forward, and I braced myself against the railing, eyes wide, lungs burning, ears ringing. I was acutely aware of how fragile we were, how easily death could claim any one of us. Yet, something had changed inside me. The fear remained, yes, but it was accompanied by a strange calm, a clarity I could not have imagined minutes before. I could think, I could act, I could respond. Survival was possible, and for the first time that day, I believed it might be. I moved quickly, instinctively, guiding Hassan and other nearby crew members to their stations, helping them stabilize critical systems. My hand still shook, my pulse still raced, but I felt purpose again, a renewed sense of duty and resolve. Fear was still present, but it no longer ruled me. I realized that survival was not just about reaction. It was about focus, courage, and perhaps even faith. That tiny spark inside me, awakened by words spoken in desperation, gave me the strength to keep moving, to keep thinking, to keep fighting for life. Hours passed in a haze of explosions, alarms, and frantic activity. Each moment felt stretched, elongated by the intensity of fear and the effort to remain functional. I don't know how many close calls we endured, how many near misses rattled the ship. All I remember is the overwhelming sense that every second mattered, that every decision could mean the difference between life and death. And amidst it all, I clung to the belief, fragile as it was, that I would survive, that I could survive. Finally, as the night deepened, the intensity of the attacks began to wane. Explosions became distant echoes, and the ominous roar of aircraft receded into the horizon. The immediate threat, at least for the moment, had passed. We were battered, exhausted, and shaken, but we were alive. Standing on the deck, looking at the dark waters stretching endlessly before me, I felt a profound mix of relief, gratitude, and awe. I had faced death and survived. But more than that, I had discovered something within myself. I had long ignored the power of acknowledging vulnerability, of seeking help beyond what I could control, and of finding clarity amidst chaos. The night felt endless, a darkness that pressed down on us with both the weight of fear and the echo of destruction. I stood on the deck, my body aching, my mind racing, and yet somehow I felt a strange stillness inside me. The explosions had faded into distant echoes, but their memory lingered, in every vibration of the ship and in every anxious glance of my fellow crew members. I had faced death, and I had survived, but I knew that survival alone was not enough. I needed more clarity, purpose, guidance, and in the quiet of that night, I turned inward and upward, seeking something I had never truly sought before. "Jesus, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the creaking metal and the soft lapping of waves against the hull. "If you are there, if you can hear me, I need help. I don't want to die. Please give me a second chance." The words trembled on my lips, uncertain, almost foreign, but they carried the weight of everything I had felt in the last hours, the fear, the loss, the grief, and the fragile spark of hope that had emerged in the moments of panic. I did not hear an audible reply, and yet, in the silence that followed, something shifted. It was subtle at first, a lightness in my chest, a clarity in my mind, a steadying of the trembling that had gripped my hands and legs. Fear had not vanished, but it no longer ruled me. I could think. I could act. I could breathe. And in that moment, I understood, with a certainty that surpassed logic, that I had been given a second chance. The chaos outside had not ceased entirely. Smoke still drifted across the deck. Alarms blared intermittently, and the crew continued to check systems and secure the vessel. But I no longer felt overwhelmed. I moved among them, speaking calmly, guiding where I could, assisting those who faltered under fear. Hassan, who had clung to my arm earlier, now followed my instructions without hesitation. His eyes met mine, wide with fear, but now tempered with trust. "We can make it," I said quietly. Not just to him, but to myself. The words were both affirmation and prayer. A declaration that life could continue, that we could survive, and that the moment of grace I felt was real. I helped the engineers check the engines, stabilize navigation systems, and ensure communications remained active. Each action, each decision, felt imbued with newfound purpose. It was no longer just duty or training, it was something more profound. A sense that my survival had meaning, and that I had been entrusted with life for a reason. Every careful adjustment I made, every instruction I gave, was guided by a clarity I could not explain. The panic that had dominated me before was now tempered by a calm focus, a stillness that seemed almost supernatural in contrast to the chaos surrounding us. Hours passed in this tense rhythm. Occasionally, another distant explosion would remind us of the danger still present, but I faced each one with a sense of resolve that had been absent before. I no longer acted out of fear alone. I acted with awareness, purpose, and faith. Every decision was measured, deliberate, and infused with the knowledge that I had been given a second chance. The fear was still there, it never completely leaves, but it had transformed. It became a tool, a reminder of the fragility of life, rather than an anchor dragging me into despair. I remember looking over the side of the vessel at the water, black and deep, reflecting the faint glow of fires on the distant horizon. The sea had always been both friend and threat, a force that demanded respect. And now, in the quiet moments between explosions and alarms, I felt gratitude. Gratitude not just for surviving the night, but for the realization that survival carried responsibility. Life, I understood, was fragile, fleeting, and precious. And those who had the courage to survive had the duty to live with purpose, to act with intention, and to honor the second chance they had been given. As the hours passed, the crew gradually regained their composure. Officers who had shouted frantically earlier now moved with calculated efficiency, securing the vessel and checking for damage. I moved among them, a steadying presence, quietly guiding and assisting. Hassan, once trembling with fear, now followed my lead, carrying out tasks with precision. I could see the relief in their eyes, the tentative hope that perhaps, just perhaps, we would make it through the night. And I felt a profound sense of connection with them, not just as colleagues, but as human beings united by the fragility of life and the gift of survival. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the events that had led me here. The fear, the chaos, the near-death experiences all had culminated in this moment of clarity. I understood that my life had been spared not because of skill alone, or luck, or training, but because I had opened myself to something greater. In that moment, I felt the presence of something beyond comprehension, something that had intervened when all else seemed lost. I could not explain it fully, but I knew it was real. And I vowed, silently and resolutely, that I would honor this second chance with my actions, with my life, and with faith that had been awakened in the crucible of terror. By dawn, the horizon began to lighten with the first pale hues of morning. The immediate danger had passed. The vessel was battered but operational, the crew exhausted but alive, and I stood on deck, looking out at the calm water that now seemed almost unreal after the chaos of the night. The air felt different, lighter, somehow sacred, filled with the quiet promise of life. And in that stillness, I whispered another prayer, gratitude for survival, for the clarity that had guided me, and for the gift of a second chance that would forever shape the rest of my life. I had faced death, I had felt panic, and I had been broken by fear. But I had survived, and in that survival, I discovered a truth I could not ignore. Life is a gift. Faith is a lifeline, and even in the darkest moments, grace can be found. That night, amid the smoke, fire, and shadows of war, I had been given a second chance, and I will never forget it. The first light of dawn broke over the Strait of Hormuz, painting the water in soft hues of gold and pink. The night's chaos had passed, leaving in its wake a silence that was almost deafening. Standing on deck, I felt the weight of exhaustion settle over me. My body ached from hours of tension, fear, and frantic movement. Every muscle felt sore, every joint stiff, every nerve raw. But even as I surveyed the quiet aftermath, a deeper, more profound weight pressed on my heart. The knowledge of what we had survived and what we had lost. The vessel bore the scars of the night's attack, Black smoke curled from damaged equipment. Dents marred the hull, and scattered debris littered the deck. I walked carefully, taking in the damage, each step a reminder of how close death had been. Yet, amidst the wreckage, the most striking reality was not the damage to the ship, but the absence of those we had lost. I thought again of the Aide who had been killed in the initial strikes. His death was a stark, inescapable reminder of our fragility. Life could be taken in a single instant, and there was nothing we could do to prevent it. I felt a wave of grief mixed with guilt for surviving when others had not. The crew moved quietly now, their energy spent, their minds heavy with shock and relief. There was no laughter, no chatter, only the subdued, tense movements of those processing what had just happened. I noticed Hassan sitting on the floor of the bridge, his head in his hands, shaking. I approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We made it," I said softly, trying to inject some reassurance, though I knew words could only do so much. He looked up at me, eyes wide, and nodded slowly, a mixture of relief and disbelief written across his face. We were alive, but at what cost? I found myself wandering to the side of the ship, looking out over the calm water, so serene now that it felt almost unreal. The explosions, the smoke, the chaos, they all seemed like a distant memory, yet they were etched permanently into my mind. I reflected on the fear, the terror, and the moments when I had truly believed I would not survive. I remembered the prayer I had whispered in desperation, the quiet invocation of Jesus that had brought me a calm I could not have found on my own. That prayer had not been a magical shield, it had not stopped the bombs or diverted the aircraft, but it had done something else. It had given me clarity, focus, and the strength to act when panic threatened to paralyze me. In the aftermath, I began to understand something fundamental. Survival was not just a matter of skill or luck. It was about the presence of mind, the courage to face fear, and, perhaps most importantly, the willingness to surrender to something greater than oneself. I had survived because, in the moment of ultimate vulnerability, I had opened my heart, admitted my weakness, and sought guidance beyond what I could see or control. That act of small and almost instinctive had changed everything. As the crew worked to assess damage and restore operational readiness, I allowed myself a few moments of reflection. I thought of my family back in Bandar Abbas, of the streets and alleys I had walked as a boy, of my parents' faces and the teachings I had once ignored. I realized that survival was not just a physical state. It was a moral and spiritual responsibility. Being alive meant more than simply continuing to breathe. It meant living with intention, with awareness, and with gratitude for the gift of another day. I walked through the ship, checking on my colleagues. Some were silent, still processing the events of the night. Others spoke quietly about what had happened, their voices tinged with disbelief. I listened, offered what comfort I could, and quietly thanked God or Jesus, as I had come to call upon him for sparing us. It was a strange, almost surreal gratitude. The night had been horrifying, but it had also revealed something essential, that life is precious, fragile, and infinitely valuable. Later, as the sun rose higher, I sat in a quiet corner of the vessel, notebook in hand. I began to write, trying to capture the events, the emotions, and the lessons. Writing felt necessary, a way to process the storm I had endured, the fear I had faced, and the second chance I had been given. I wrote about the panic, the chaos, the closeness of death, and the clarity that had come through prayer. I wrote about the courage of the crew, the loss of our comrade, and the humbling realization that life could change in a single moment. Reflection brought with it understanding. I understood that fear was a natural response, not a weakness. I understood that panic could be overcome, not by ignoring it, but by confronting it with clarity and faith. I understood that life, once threatened, gains a new depth, a new meaning, and a new urgency. And I understood that my second chance was not simply about surviving physically. It was about living differently, consciously, and gratefully. By late morning, the crew had restored the vessel to a functional state. The alarms were quiet, the fires extinguished, and the radar once again operational. But the ship, and all of us aboard, had been forever changed. We had faced death and survived, and in doing so, we had glimpsed the fragility and value, of life in a way that no routine, drill or training exercise could ever convey. I returned to the deck, looking out at the horizon. The sea, once so menacing in the darkness, now seemed calm, almost forgiving. I felt a profound sense of peace. Not complete peace, the memory of the night would linger, and the grief of those lost would never fully fade, but peace tempered by clarity, gratitude, and awareness. I had been given a second chance, and with it came responsibility to live fully, to honor life, and to act with intention in every moment. That day, as the vessel sailed through the Strait of Hormuz, I made a quiet vow to myself. I would not take this gift of survival for granted. I would not forget the terror, the fear, or the moment I had turned to Jesus in desperation. I would live differently, with gratitude, awareness, and purpose. Life, I realized, is not simply a series of breaths or days. It is a precious opportunity to act, to grow, and to honor the second chance we are given. The events of that night continued to echo in my mind long after the explosions faded and the ship returned to calmer waters. I could feel the weight of what had happened pressing on my chest, a mixture of grief, relief, and awe. I had survived, yes, but survival alone was no longer enough. The second chance I had been given demanded something more: change, awareness, and purpose. Life after that night would never be the same, and I was beginning to understand why. As the days passed, I reflected constantly on the events in the Strait of Hormuz. Each moment replayed vividly the fear, the chaos, the near-death experiences, and the prayer I had whispered in desperation. What had seemed like a fleeting, instinctive plea had become a turning point in my life. I realized that faith, which I had long dismissed, had guided me through my darkest hour. It had not shielded me from danger, but it had steadied my mind, strengthened my resolve, and given me the clarity to act decisively. In acknowledging my vulnerability and turning to something greater than myself, I had found the strength to survive. The transformation began subtly at first. I noticed a difference in how I approached my duties, how I interacted with my colleagues, and how I viewed the world around me. Where fear had once dominated my thoughts, I now felt a tempered awareness, a recognition that life is fragile and fleeting, and that each moment carries the weight of possibility and responsibility. I began to speak differently, act more deliberately, and approach challenges with a newfound patience. Even the smallest decisions, whether to help a crew member check a system or to calm someone in distress, felt imbued with meaning. Faith became central to my daily life. I prayed regularly, not only in moments of fear, but as a practice of gratitude and reflection. I began to read more about Jesus, seeking understanding of the man whose name I had uttered in my moment of panic. The teachings I once dismissed suddenly carried weight, offering guidance, comfort, and perspective. I realized that survival was not merely physical. It was spiritual, emotional, and moral. The second chance I had been given was an invitation to live fully, with intention, courage, and compassion. The crew noticed the change in me, too. Hassan, in particular, looked to me differently. Where once he had relied on my skills and authority out of necessity, now he seemed to sense something deeper, a calmness, a confidence rooted not just in training, but in faith and perspective. Others followed suit, gradually noticing that even in moments of tension, I no longer reacted with fear, but with clarity and purpose. It was a subtle transformation, but it affected the dynamic of the ship, bringing a sense of stability and hope even in uncertain circumstances. I also found myself reflecting on the losses we had endured. The aide who had been killed earlier remained vivid in my mind. His death reminded me constantly of the fragility of life, and I made a commitment to honor him not only in memory but in the way I lived. Each day became a conscious effort to act with integrity, to show compassion, and to embrace life with gratitude. I realized that a second chance was not simply about surviving. It was about transforming that survival into meaningful action, about making life count in ways that extended beyond oneself. Outside the vessel, the world had not changed. The Strait of Hormuz remained strategically tense. Global powers continued their maneuvers, and life went on with its usual challenges and dangers. But inside me, something had shifted irrevocably. I no longer approached life as a series of routines, tasks, or obligations. I approached it with awareness, intentionality, and gratitude. Each sunrise became a reminder of the gift of life, each moment an opportunity to act with courage, compassion, and purpose. Over the following months, I began sharing my experience with colleagues in a way I had never done before. Not to boast, not to seek recognition, but to convey a lesson about life, fear, faith, and transformation. I spoke of the night in the strait, of the fear that had nearly overwhelmed me, and of the prayer that had steadied my hands and mind. I shared how the second chance I had received had changed me not only in my actions, but in how I perceived the world, my fellow humans, and my place in the larger tapestry of life. Many listened quietly, some skeptical, some reflective, but all seemed to recognize the sincerity of my experience. The second chance had not made life perfect, nor had it eliminated fear, danger, or loss, but it had given me perspective. I understood that life's fragility was not a curse, but a teacher, offering lessons about gratitude, courage, and faith. I learned to approach fear as a signal rather than a prison, to seek clarity amidst chaos, and to embrace each moment with intention and awareness. I realized that survival was only meaningful when paired with reflection, learning, and transformation. Now, standing once more on the deck of the vessel, looking out over the calm waters of the Strait of Hormuz, I felt a profound sense of peace. The sea, once terrifying in its uncertainty, now felt like a reminder of life's vastness and beauty, its unpredictability and opportunity. I breathed deeply, savoring the air, the sunlight, and the simple fact of being alive. I knew that the night of explosions, panic, and prayer had forever changed me. I had been broken, terrified, and humbled, but I had been given a second chance, and I had chosen to embrace it. In the months and years that followed, that second chance guided my actions. I approached life differently, with faith and gratitude, with courage and awareness. I nurtured relationships, helped those in need, and carried the lessons of fear, survival, and divine guidance with me every day. The night in the Strait of Hormuz remained etched in my memory, a permanent reminder that life is fragile, that death can arrive without warning, and that grace, whether called faith, divine intervention, or inner clarity, can appear when least expected. I had faced death, stared into the abyss, and felt the full weight of fear and panic. And in that crucible, I had discovered a truth I could not unlearn. Life is a gift. Fear is a teacher, and faith can be a lifeline. The second chance I had received was not merely a reprieve. It was a transformation, and I would carry it with me, in thought, action, and spirit, for the rest of my days.